So let's go back to the accusation that Sam Harris is committing the naturalistic fallacy. Now, once you've made the distinction between third-person facts and first-person facts, which Sam basically is doing, of course Sam wants to say that if you learn specific facts about the left quadrants, you can then immediately deduce ought statements. This is the second way in which you can interpret the naturalistic fallacy. That it is a fallacy to, in principle, deduce from an is statement an ought statement. That from something is the case, something ought to be the case. Now, the question is, what kind of facts are the facts that the first is statement is including or about? If it's third-person facts, this is to say, if it's facts about reality as not involving consciousness, indeed you cannot deduce an ought statement. It just makes no sense. From just knowing that a car runs 60 miles an hour, you can't deduce a car ought to run 60 miles an hour. It's absurd. It doesn't make sense. But if the facts that you describe in your is statement are facts about consciousness, the whole thing changes, the whole picture changes. Because the issue at hand is that Sam has this, uses the picture of the worst possible misery, I think. Imagine a state of mind, which is the worst possible misery, which, all things being equal, is the worst possible state you could imagine. It's something that you want to get out. It's a state you don't want to be in. Unconditional. This is, there is no hope for you. There is nothing good to gain from this situation. Imagine the absolutely worst possible situation in which you would be in. Now, Sam's point is to say that this situation is a situation, or this mental state, is a mental state that ought not to be. You not wanting to be in that state is equivalent to you not oughting to be in that state. What he does is he equates wants or interests with obligations in this case. In other words, my wants, this is I don't want to be in that state, is your obligation to make me not be in that state. Or as Peterson puts it in other parts of his discussions, my rights are your responsibilities. So what Sam is doing, he's saying that what the word ought actually means, what the word means, it designates a state that you want or don't want to be in. It's not something that is being added outside from consciousness. It's not something that has some kind of transcendent source. Let's look. Remember where the argument is coming from. The naturalistic fallacy was an argument that Hume was using against religious arguments, which were trying to say that if because something is being said in the Bible, therefore it ought to be done. And Hume found this to be weird. The interesting thing is that that has actually been turned around. Nowadays, interestingly, it is often theologically inclined thinkers like David Craig Lane, I think his name is, who are arguing that scientists can't tell you anything about what ought to be the case because they're just dealing basically with that matter and they don't have any kind of divine legitimation of imperatives. There is an irony behind it, isn't it? And this is the kind of way the naturalistic fallacy has been used that Sam Harris is arguing against. He's saying everything that the term ought is designating, we can find in this world. You don't need some kind of divine, not intervention, but divine legitimation of something, that something ought or ought not to be the case. In other words, you not wanting to die is reason enough for me not to make you die. It is reason enough to create an imperative for me. There is no additional necessity for God as a legislator to further say it is good or not good for you to die. If your interests become the highest arbitrator, so to say, of what is good and what is bad. The subject becomes the highest arbitrator of what is good and what is bad. And this is how modern ethics actually works. Modern ethics is not interested in some abstract good, something that pleases a point of view that only God can take. But modern ethics is based in the specific interests of the you that is facing you, and in finding out what the you wants and finding ways to feed these needs. This is how historically also rights have developed. Rights came up as an idea once consciousness was discovered, once first personal reality was discovered by leading intellectuals. And it was in the 18th century where in a pretty short period the idea of consciousness as a fact actually popped up in broad intellectual discussions. And at the same time, the idea of the human right popped up. Look it up in Lynn Hunt. She has done great work on that. Popped up and spread massively. The moment you recognize subjects as subjects, the moment you recognize that you, as a perspective, has a way of perceiving the world, the moment you realize him as someone who has a first-person perspective, you start treating this first-person perspective in a different way. You start seeing that it is not like pure objects that are just simply surrounding you. You start realizing that you can recognize him as a subject of own interests, and here the term ought is being equated, gets the meaning of what, for me as an observer, when I want to know what ought I to do, I want to know what is it that will make you happy as an individual. So the individual gets into the middle of the picture.